My name is Tashay. I am a data scientist here at Enigma. I am involved with this project that I'm going to present to you. It's called Standing Together Against Trafficking. You'll hear me shortly refer to it as STAT. And I kind of got involved with this project because Enigma tends to do what are called like these lab projects or these kind of offshoots from our normal day-to-day, but like when we want to do data for good, we want to make sure we're leveraging the actual skill sets that we have here to also just kind of like take a moment and do some good for the world outside of our normal day-to-day. Not that we try to do bad there either, but you get my drift. Cool. So a little bit about Enigma. Enigma is a data linking company. We connect internal data to public data generally to generate powerful insights for companies. We also do a lot of connecting public data to other public data. There are certainly other limitations, but we try to do it all. We think there's a lot of value in data as it stands alone, but you really get to learn much more when you can connect it to something else. And a topic like human trafficking is a great example of how we try to bring that to bear in trying to connect internal data to public data or other public data to public data to really see what we can find, to really surface some of those weird patterns and things like that that can hopefully bring the human trafficking work to the same spaces or to the same level as like sex trafficking or labor trafficking rather. So here's a small case study that Enigma's done, again, just because we like doing data for good in our spare time. We did a small case study about labor trafficking, so a little bit different from sex trafficking. Human trafficking for labor is a massive problem in the US. It was one of the most, labor trafficking, especially as it relates to the agriculture industry, was one of the most popular ways that people were suspected of being trafficked in 2014 to 2015. And so at Enigma, the way we were able to link data is by linking some public data around agriculture visa applications and connecting it to a database or a data set about like recruiters that have been debarred for potentially suspicious behaviors as it relates to agriculture visas and labor. And the way that this work is impactful for financial institutions or law enforcement agencies is because the data is public, right? You can look at a list of folks who've been debarred for weird behaviors, and banks can make sure they're not, conducting business with folks who are probably on these lists. And they can also do a little bit more around like geolocation of data and see if there are other areas that are like potentially vulnerable that they may not have known about before. So here's an example of a map that you could create. So this is just two linked data sets. You have 2017 H-2A visas, which are labor visas, and you have it joined onto a map with debarred recruiters. So just by looking at this on a surface level, you can see where there are these pockets of, a large number of visas, but also a large number of folks who've been debarred, right? So if these areas aren't already on someone's radar, this might be a good way to just like initially surface the data and be able to drill down to whatever you think might be suspicious. Right, so in the previous presentation, there was a lot of talk about, the importance of being able to identify these weird behaviors that people are engaging in. Being able to recognize like these things called red flags or indicators, these descriptions of really what seem innocent behaviors on the surface, being able to connect them to one another and, build out these larger profiles of what might represent like a trafficker's behavior or the behavior of someone who's been trafficked is super important. As you can imagine, every organization who's involved in this kind of work has their own way of doing it, right? I might be doing something in my office that you might not know about at your office, and it can also be really difficult for us to know what the other's doing. And in order to really leverage that, we thought, wouldn't it be great if you could put all that information in one place? So is there a way for us to be able to communicate with each other using technology and sharing what we know about these weird behaviors or potentially suspicious behaviors that might indicate trafficking? So there are a couple organizations that do a really great job of identifying these suspicious behaviors. One of them is an organization called Polaris. They're a big leader in the space. They put out this report called The Typology of Modern Slavery, where they attempt to boil up these like smaller behaviors and really create a profile of what like what trafficking might look like in different industries. So, you know, what might it look like from a victim's perspective, from a trafficker, from a recruiter, etc., in the pornography space, or you know, the manufacturing space, or I mean, you name it. There are a bunch of different spaces, but they basically try to give folks who are doing this work an idea of, you know, what they think really exemplifies this kind of behavior. Another example would be the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So as you can imagine, they also have things that they know after combing through data about like what might represent human trafficking behavior. And theirs might be a little bit more specific to like searching through financial records. So some of these things might be around people's physical behaviors, but some of them might also be around like spending and purchasing habits. But just based on these two examples, I called them reports for a reason, because that's what they are. And as you can imagine, you have these reports, right, which are typically PDF documents, and it can be really difficult to kind of like sift through that information in an efficient way and really act on it. So when we're thinking about using technology to really help the work that people are doing in this space, we identified a few challenges on the surface. So you have numerous sources of information. There are a ton of really great pieces out there from different organizations about what they've found to be useful, but there's no one real place to go and like get a full glimpse of everything that people have identified as it relates to trafficking behaviors. There are different ways to reference behavioral patterns. So some people might call something a red flag, some people might call it an indicator, some people might call something a typology, and sometimes it gets a little fuzzy about like what organization might be using to reference a given thing. So that was one thing that we wanted to try to tackle, give people a more unified way of referring to this behavior. There's information locked inside of PDFs, as I've just mentioned. You are data people, you know the powers and the frustrations of dealing with PDFs. It's difficult to share information across organizations. So if we're working, like I said, in a very siloed manner, I don't know what you know, you don't know what I know. So we really wanted to think about how we could use technology to kind of solve some of these challenges. All right, so here we have STAT. So by working with organizations like Polaris and ACAMS, the concept of a technology platform that facilitates this sort of information sharing was born. And that's what we're calling STAT, Standing Together Against Trafficking. We had a very collaborative approach to developing this platform. So as the technology people, we wanted to absolutely be respectful of the folks who are on the ground doing this work, who are the experts in the field. And there's no way we can build a thing without really respecting the experts in the industry. So the first step, of course, would be to partner with folks in the industry, on the ground doing the work. We really want to understand what's the workflow of someone who's an investigator. Like, what does your day-to-day look like? If something's on your radar, how do you get from beginning to end? And is there somewhere we can like interject in order to make that a little bit easier? What are your information sharing needs? Is there ever a time where you wish you knew what another organization was up to? If you do, how do you go about that right now? Do you just call up your friend who you happen to know who works there? Or like, how do you go about this? Is it just at a conference? What do you do? How can we help? We wanted to really understand the data, right? So the data as it stands lives in these PDFs. We wanted to become experts enough that we could speak the language and really try to break down that barrier between us and the experts in the field, and be able to work smartly with the data and not very naive. We systematize the data aggregation. So can we map all of this data to a standardized schema? And we wanted to test those hypotheses. So after we've tried to map this data, get it back in front of the experts to say, does this make sense to you? Did we do this right? Great, you have feedback. Tell us what we could have done better. What is it that we're not understanding about this so that we can improve and make it useful to you? And then my team, which is myself and a host of other folks from a bunch of different disciplines within the company, we designed the platform that we're calling STAT, The platform makes this indicator or these behavioral informations more searchable and in real time. So we're extracting this information from PDFs and putting it in a way that people can filter it, they can look through it, they can search it, and they can be able to update and collaborate with one another in a much more like real-time fashion. So STAT, here's a screenshot of STAT, a design from STAT. So STAT is a technology platform that facilitates and enriches the sharing of typologies, red flags, and indicators. So as you saw, I showed you literally 2 snapshots of reports of like what people would look at today. And we're building out this platform where people can essentially toggle through filters. I'm only interested in this industry. I'm only interested, in red flags or indicators as it relates to credit card payments. I don't want to know the universe of, typologies or indicators. I really want to drill down to what's pertinent to my job. We've really tried to give people that option for the very first time. I can show you just a little bit more about what that looks like if technology works with me. So these are very much still designs, so bear with me. Okay, so this is, again, an example of what an indicator or what a card would look like in the STAT platform. You'd have a summary of a given indicator, and you'd be able to assign what are essentially like tags or filters to a given indicator to say, like, these are the financial products that you could expect in this kind of behavior, or to be associated with this kind of behavior. These are the industries that you could expect to be impacted by this type of behavior. And like I mentioned, folks can be, you can toggle between the things that are important to you, so you don't have to look at all the information at once, like you would in a PDF, right? You don't really have the flexibility of knowing if the next thing is going to be important to you. Whereas here, you can just make that decision on the outset. And again, these are just an example of what filtering looks like. You would even have the opportunity to filter based on like geographic location, if there were indicators that you were only interested in for a certain country or et cetera. You really have a lot more flexibility in a way that hasn't existed before. So STAT, this is of course not a single-handed endeavor. We have a ton of supporting organizations, be it financial institutions, law enforcement agencies, and a host of nonprofits. Here's a very short list of who some of those organizations are. What's been super important to us, like I mentioned before, is like really respecting the folks who do this work every day and leveraging their knowledge around this sort of thing. And even taking that a step farther, we really wanted to be strategic about some of the nonprofits we've reached out to do this work so that we can really bring it full circle. And here's an example of what I mean. So we're working with an organization called Enigma STAT. They are a nonprofit organization, and their work is around transforming survivors of human trafficking into software professionals. So while Enigma has designed the platform, and we've done the user research, we've done all of those things, we've actually given the spec over to Enigma and said, hey, can you guys build the actual infrastructure? So these are people who have survived human trafficking, and they're building the actual platform as a way to put that power back into the hands of folks who are most impacted by this sort of behavior. So what's the goal? The ultimate goal of STAT is that we want financial institutions, law enforcement agencies, and nonprofits to have the most up-to-date knowledge on these these potentially suspicious behaviors. So rather than wait 3 or 5 years for another report to come out with some new, flag behaviors, folks can contribute to this platform every single day. Every single time they think of something new, they can upload it, and someone from XYZ organization has immediate access to that info. We want it to be presented in an effective format, right? You need to be able to filter. Sometimes you need to be able to get to this information on the fly, easily, extract whatever you need to maybe build a SQL query in your database or whatever the case may be. It's a lot easier to get there when you have an interface as opposed to a PDF. And just put everything at your fingertips. You can access the platform from your computer, from your phone, if you're on the go, whatever the case may be. So just really break down some of those barriers and let folks do the really important stuff. So with STAT, we are building a model of human trafficking through linked data, right? We want to be able to, in an ideal world, we want to be able to solve human trafficking by being able to link data and just really put the tools in front of the folks who do this work every day. And that is my spiel. Thank you. Questions? Hopefully I have answers. Yes?
Have you tried, hopefully through district attorney office or some other organization, to make it required for those agencies to provide data to you, not in PDF form, but through APIs in structured way?
Question is, have we tried to make it a requirement that organizations participate and upload information to the STAT platform? The short answer to that is no. We're hoping that we can sort of adopt a more organic base for this platform, right? We don't want it to make the work harder. We don't want to, have someone be upset that they have to do yet another thing. We hope that you find so much value in the platform, and it's a lot easier to shorten your actual workload, that people will adopt it, and you won't necessarily have to force someone into using the platform, because then you're creating a tension there that doesn't already exist. Yes?
You mentioned how the red flags, part of how you assess data is looking at rural areas or seeing a spike in financial transactions, or that was just one of the examples I believe you discussed.
Yeah.
Have you ever received feedback that some of your algorithms or rules are written such that someone who's perfectly innocent, that isn't doing anything wrong at all, would be raised as a red flag? For instance, you may have just retired, so you went to a rural area to retire,
Yeah.
and hence a lot of your financial transactions are there, and you could be further away from trafficking. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. The question was, have we ever found that any of the algorithms that you might use for identifying red flags or anything like that would trigger something like a false positive? So are you incorrectly identifying this behavior? So one thing is that Enigma does not operate in that space. So we're not actually like deriving these algorithms that are doing the work. It would mostly just be like someone who works for maybe like a bank to say, okay, this is the behavior that we've seen, and we just want to share that information to another financial institution, and it would really be up to that institution to implement it in a way that would work for them and their use case. I think, yeah, that's my response to that. We really just want to make it easier for folks to share that information. So if you've identified a pattern, we just want you to be able to share that and not necessarily us make the judgment about like what that behavior should be, if that makes sense.
So what I'm hearing you say is you hand off the data to them, and in handing off the data, you hand off responsibility for how they interpret it.
So there's a slight distinction. I think we don't actually process any financial records or anything like that as it relates to this initiative. We're really just using information that's either publicly on the internet or that we've been, sanctioned to use from some of these organizations. And we're literally just saying like, we've extracted it from this PDF and put it here, and go forth and make the most important decisions for your organization. We're not passing judgment on any of that. We're offering any sort of like insight around whether we think it's a good indicator or not. And the hope is that folks will be uploading these things themselves. So the onus will not necessarily be on Enigma to say like, oh, this is a good indicator or not. It'll be for the industry to vet amongst one another about whether or not the indicator is useful. Other questions, concerns, comments? Great. Yes?
Can you give us a few example patterns that are seen on the platform?
I am going to decline that. That is, sorry. The question was, can I give some examples of suspicious behaviors? I'm not going to do that. That is beyond my scope of expertise. And I say that because a lot of it can be very sensitive. It's not, all of it is not public information in hopes that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. So I will not share indicators. Yes. Cool. All right, thanks.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I want to thank Jennifer and the New York District Attorney's Office. I want to thank Tashay and Enigma, and then Enigma and Development Guild for sponsoring and hosting the event. Before I go, I want to introduce one of the other organizers of the Data and the Greater Good meetup, Elaine, to come and speak about next month's event. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Mary. It's wonderful to see so many of you here tonight. I hope you found tonight's presentation very informative. Next month, our presenter is Gary Bagley, CEO of New York Cares, and he's going to talk with us about the use of data and innovation in data for volunteer recruitment, volunteer engagement in this digital era, and how they are so successful in recruiting so many people in New York and getting us around that kinder, gentler New York. So hopefully all of you will join us at that meetup. And after that, for April, we have the 92nd Street Y will come and talk to us about how they're using AI, automation in some of their marketing predictive model to continue to be a pinnacle of New York City culture. So we hope to see you at both of those. Thank you very much.